technical difficulties. I'm running multiple trainings, so I think it was bound to happen. But thank you so much for coming for today's webinar. Hopefully that 5-minute delay allowed more folks to join. Oh, I'm so sorry about that, Susanna. I'll send you the link to the recording. We'll have that up a little bit later this afternoon. But you are tuning in for day 2 of the 5-day Executive Director Training Series with your instructor, Cheryl Cosley, who is the principal of Cheryl A. Cosley and Associates. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist at the Native Learning Center. We're also grateful that you could tune in for today's webinar. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. We also have our copyright infringement law pictured here, so just a friendly reminder that the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. If you have recently joined the platform, just know that you can access recordings as well as courses, slides of or PDFs of the slides of presentations, all in the courses section. And with this executive director training in particular, Cheryl has put together a really lengthy list of helpful resource items for you, different reference items that you can check. So all of those, there's about 33 of them, as well as a list of what all 33 are, and those are also located in that courses section. I did put the presentation slide link for you in the chat, but there are a lot of helpful resources that are in that courses section. If this is your first time on, just know moving forward, you won't have to re-register for each individual day. You'll just log into the webinar platform during the time, click on the green banner, and that's how you will join. We ask that you try to join with listen-only capabilities because it just cuts down on audio feedback. And then if you've joined and you realize that your sound is coming out of the wrong device, maybe you're trying to use your headphones, maybe you have a speaker, you can use that little telephone icon down at the bottom of your screen to bring up a list of your mic and your speaker devices, and you can select the correct audio output. There's different ways to interact during the webinar. We are primarily going to rely on the public chat. If you don't yet have it open, you can click on public chat that's in this messages menu panel. That'll bring it open. We do encourage class participation, questions, comments. If you have any tech support issues, you can ask me there. Most questions that you ask, Cheryl will end up answering through the course of the presentation. But if you want to kind of send it into the chat just so you know it's in there, she will address anything remaining at the end. So you'll just click on that box where it says send message to public chat, type what you want to say, hit enter, or hit that little paper airplane icon, and that will submit it in where we can all see. If you go down here to the shared notes feature, you will find a lot of other helpful links. And then if you did join and you have your mic on, you can mute yourself by going over here to the little mic icon that's right next to the telephone. We do want to know, who's in the room, where you're tuning in from. So if you could take a moment to test out that public chat for me and introduce yourselves. You can let us know your name, where you're joining from. It's fun to see all the different states and tribal nations who are represented, your work or your role in Indian country that probably led you to today's webinar, and then your tribal affiliation if you have one. You might be a tribal employee without any affiliation. That's okay too. And then just a final note before I hand it over to Cheryl, try your best not to click on the red menu panel that's all the way to the left-hand side of your screen. It's nothing bad, but anything you click on there, it's going to take you out of the webinar and it's going to take you to what you have selected on the menu. You'll just rejoin by clicking on that green banner once again, but just want to give you a heads up because it will pull you out of the webinar immediately. There won't be like a "are you sure" message or anything like that. So just a heads up. All right, and then while you guys are introducing yourselves in that public chat, it's with great pleasure that I introduce your webinar instructor, Cheryl Cosley. And Cheryl, I have made you presenter now.
Thank you very much. So this presentation is courtesy of the Native Learning Center and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We fall under Native American programs. So welcome and good afternoon. My name is Cheryl Cosley. My Anishinaabe name is Redbird Woman. I am Loon Clan and I come from the place of the Pike, Keno Shinkoning. I am from Bay Mills Indian Community. Our reservation is located at the top of Michigan. Waters actually border Canada. We're Ojibwe Chippewa people. So Keno Shinkoning is place of the pike in my language. I served as director of housing for my tribe for over 28 years. During that time, I was the chairperson for the Great Lakes Indian Housing Association for 7 years. I was also honored to serve on the board of directors for the National American Indian Housing Council. I first started as their secretary, became the vice chair, and then eventually became a two-term chairwoman. So I did 16 years on that board. I started Cheryl A. Cosley and Associates in March of 2019. I provide training and technical assistance through the lower 48 and Alaska. I work up in the villages. I work in the pueblos quite often. I work, with the rancherias in California. So I go all over, and I've been very, very blessed to be able to do that in my career. This is my information. It's at the beginning and the end. If you ever need anything, please feel free to reach out to me. I will always try to, help you. If I'm teaching, I can't get on there right away, or if I'm on the road flying, but I will always try to get back to you. So the objectives for this particular course is executive director training. It'll cover the key roles and responsibilities of an executive director, some of those administrative requirements necessary for NAHASDA implementation, program oversight to assure compliance. We're going to also discuss how to navigate HUD resources, the statute, the regulations in Part 200, and we went through a good portion of that yesterday. You have to know where to get your information in order to make sure that you are compliant. So the reference materials that she talked about, the NAHASDA statute is the first one. The second one is the regulations at 1,000, and then the uniform administrative requirements are the third. The income limits, calculating annual income for purposes of eligibility, and assisting non-low-income families 6, 7, and 8. You need those, and somebody needs to have those when you're charging anybody rent and when you're working with your A&O policy and things like that. That is the guidance that you need to be able to do that. The insurance requirements are under here, your eligible activities, your total development cost. When you build, you have to be within those, constraints. Conflict of interest provisions. There's a policy status table in there, self-monitoring links, a brand new guidance on federal supply sources that came out last week. That was updated. We're allowed to utilize GSA purchasing as a housing entity. Your tribe has always been able to, but the housing entity itself hasn't. Federal financial reports, procurement policy samples, use of GEMS, the HOTMA guidance. You have to update your admissions and occupancy policy if you use a Section 8 definition, or if you're one of those tribes that use that definition, that you're going to use all three and utilize the one most advantageous either to your recipient or the tribe. So please make sure you pull down those things. Right now, the Code Talk website, and that's where you go to for those of you that missed yesterday. That's where somebody should be in there from your organization at least on a weekly basis, checking the PIH notices, the program guidances, and the Dear Tribal Leader Lender section. Not lender, Dear Tribal Leader Letter section. That's where you find out any new rules that they implement. So we went through eligible participants yesterday. The families, the non-low-income families, and the essential families. We're going to talk about the law enforcement provision now, and then your waiting list and your payments charged. We're going to talk about the IHP, the APR, policy requirements, monitoring, over the next 5 days. We've got quite a few here. Indian preference, lease requirements, procurement, conflict of interest, many different ways. Useful life, local cooperation agreements, labor requirements, understanding your HUD office. Nobody ever really explained who did what where. And they'll say, well, you need to talk to, your grants management office, or that's over in grants evaluation. Well, how are you going to know what they do unless somebody explains that office? So this is hopefully will help you with that also. And then, the HUD Title VI loan guarantee and the 184 program. So law enforcement officers, the NAHASDA statute itself actually has a provision at 201B that addresses the provision of housing and housing assistance for law enforcement officers on your Indian areas, you know, your Indian reservations, your pueblos, your rancherias, however you are. And you can put them in your housing if that is what you as the executive director or your board of commissioner or your tribal council, depending on how you're set up, wants to do. They can be non-native. They can be over income. You have to make a statement along with their, you know, information that you put in their file that you have determined that the presence of that law enforcement may deter crime. Now, they can't be a dog catcher. They have certain criteria that the officer has to be employed full-time, federal, state, county, tribal, or other unit of local government. They need to be sworn to uphold and make arrest for violations of federal, state, county, or tribal law. In addition, the program must determine the presence of that law enforcement officer may deter crime. Law enforcement officers assisted under this provision can receive the same benefits as a low-income family. So you don't have to charge them more. You can, but you don't have to. And they don't count toward your 10% authority. If their income falls between 80 and 100%, we call that 10% authority. And I tried to explain that one yesterday. You can service 10% of your grant amount if you put it in your IHP for people that fall between 80 and 100%. Should that law enforcement officer, if he, you know, meets all that other criteria, his family, you know, you come in and they're over and they fall between the 80 and 100%, you don't have to count them off of that in your tracking. They're exempt from that, you know, that portion. So we do have that provision that you can help law enforcement if you decide to. Now, we utilize that, and we also had fair market housing, and we house many different law enforcement here, and it did deter crime. We would ask them that they would leave their cruisers out where we could see them, where they could be readily seen. And to this day, I sit right now, we built an 80-unit project and then had 20 units for conventional mortgages where I sit. And they're in 3 areas, and there's a huge playground in between them all. And there's a state police officer next door to me. You round that next corner, and there's Bay Mills Tribal Police. And then you'll hit the next corner, and you see Fish and Wildlife. You'll see a sheriff's car. You'll see, you know, again, another tribal police, or perhaps another state police, because we've got them, you know, all the way through. And we don't have any gangs. We have very, very low crime rate. And you know, that is one of the reasons why it actually deters crime. People don't want to come onto your reservation if, you know, they don't want to come on and, you know, for bad reasons if they see that much law enforcement presence. So it can deter crime. So under 1104, when you go to the regs, what families are eligible for affordable housing activities? Following families are eligible. Low-income families. A non-low-income family can receive assistance in accordance with 1110. That family can receive housing assistance on a reservation or Native Alaskan area if the family's housing needs cannot reasonably be met without such assistance, and the recipient determines that the presence of that family on the reservation or Native Alaskan area is essential to the well-being of Native American and Native Alaskan families. Okay, so you have your, you know, essential families provision that you can help. You have your law enforcement provisions that you can help with. So any other time, you're supposed to be servicing low-income Native Americans. And I've seen findings for people that have housed non-natives and come around the monitoring time, and they got findings for that. So items that are going to be checked during a HUD monitoring visit, and they come around, all program files have to show proof the family was low income at the time of admission. Remember, you got to keep that in there forever. You move it from file to file. If the participant is non-low income at the time of admission, you have to have proof that that need for housing could not be reasonably be met without the assistance, without your assistance, your NAHASDA assistance, or that the family meets the definition of essential family, or under that law enforcement provision. And then they're going to look to see if the proof that that family meets all the requirements under your approved policy prior to admission. Okay. It's got to be in the file. It's got to be dated before you put them in there. Okay. Always move your proof of eligibility and admission from file to file and keep in the current file. Sometimes, when you're in a program 20 and 25 years, you'll have recipients that are in there that long. And their files start to get really big, and you end up moving them to another file and, consolidating and storing all that other information somewhere else. Well, the proof of eligibility has got to go with them. So the summary of requirements for serving non-low income families. An essential family requires no HUD approval. You don't need to charge them more. Okay. That's your choice. And they don't count against your 10% authority. Continued occupancy. Okay. If they're income eligible when they move in, and then their income goes up, and you hope that happens, for your tribal members. You have to address that in policy. First of all, do we want to continue to service them? Because those are for low income, those are low income units, If there's no other place for them to go, a lot of tribes will say, yeah, let them stay there, If they have, like our tribe has fair market, they would say, why don't you try to, give them 90 days to get into a different unit if you've got openings. If you're in the middle of Oklahoma, like some, Shawnee or those places, there's other rental units around. Here, there's not. There's nothing on the reservation. We have a town 25 miles away, and because of the locks work on the Sioux locks, that we have, you can't get a rental anywhere. So we would probably be inclined to let them stay there, so that continued occupancy, you have to address it in your policy. Are you going to let them stay or not? And you have to be consistent. It's the same thing for everybody. Either they all go or they can all stay. And then you need to decide, are you going to charge them more? Because you can charge them more when they make between 80 and 100%. You can charge them up to fair market, or there's a formula you can use. Okay. Has to be determined, put in your policy, and they don't count against your 10% authority. Your 10% authority families, okay? You don't need HUD approval. You do need to charge them differently, and they do count against your 10% authority. Secretary approved. Should you go over, let's say you have $300,000 to help your non-low income families. You're a big housing authority, okay? And you need $301,000 to be able to help that last family, because you're counting that 10% authority. You need to get HUD's permission and say, hey, we have one mother family and we're short, like $2,000 or whatever it is. Can we assist them? And they'll give you a yay or a nay. And by definition, they already exceed that cap. And then anybody that's over 100%, you have to get HUD approval before you help them. You do need HUD approval. You do need to charge them differently, but for some reason, they don't count against that 10% cap. I guess because the cap's from 80 to 100. If they're over 100, they could do that. So the guidance, anything to do with helping non-low income people or essential or law enforcement, you got 10% authority. That's all found in that guidance 2014-02, providing assistance to non-low income families. And that is in your reference materials. Okay. So your non-low income families, those that fall between 80 to 100%, you need to document, that they have a need. that can't be met without your assistance, and you need to make sure that you have a moderate income policy. You should have an essential families policy, and you should have a law enforcement policy if you're going to, go and help in those three areas. So, something like this. And it lays it out, the policy, the purpose, the applicability, the determination and need, the determination that the housing cannot be met without the assistance, rejection letters, the different things that you can utilize. Some of those required documents could be property inspections, evidence of living in temporary housing, verification of the family's income, rejection letters from lenders or landlords, letters stating the family doesn't qualify for any other federal, state, or local housing program, or there's none available. And then, for your moderate income checklist, it's the same thing. You make that determination of the need. It could be an incomplete bathroom, incomplete kitchen, inadequate cooling, it's pest infested, it's a fire hazard, it's got electrical deficiencies. You build your own criteria within your policy. They're in temporary housing. Cost burden, it's over 50% of their adjusted gross income, including the utilities. The housing stock is insufficient in the area. That's definitely one we would click here. You're not able at this time to get conventional mortgages available on your trust land. We still got places where, they fight with that. So make sure that you build up a policy for those areas. So non-low income rental payment requirements, the rents including your home buyer payments under a lease purchase agreement to be paid by a non-low income family cannot be less than that of your families at 80% of median income. It does not need to exceed your fair market value, and you determine in your policy per program. You can change it from program to program, but within every program that you offer, you have to be consistent. That's what they look at quite a bit. Your auditor will look at it, HUD will look at it. Do you treat all of your tribal members the same? Are you treating them fairly? Okay. Determine in your policy if you're going to use the HUD formula, which it tells you how to do it there, or a fair market rent. Fair market rent seems to be higher than the formula. Okay. So this will give you an idea how to do this. The example, 80% of the median income for a family of four in Seattle, $75,040. The rental payment for a family at 80% of median income is $1,200 per month. A fair market for a 3-bedroom is $1,793 a month in that area. So to calculate the rental payment for your non-low income family, you divide their income by 80% of the median income. You multiply that number by the amount of the monthly rent for your low income family. That amount is the minimum monthly payment, and you need to address that in your policies. Okay. The 30% rule does not apply to your families that are over 80% of median income. Those that fall between 80 and 100%, that 30% rule is null and void. So this is how I like to do it. So your income of your non-low income family is $88,000. You divide that by the income of a low income family, $75,040. Okay. You multiply that. Oh, well, that actually divided comes out to 1.17. You multiply that times the rent of your, low income rent. So the rent at 80% of median income is $1,200. And you will either charge them $1,404, that's the formula equivalent, or you can go up to the fair market at $1,793. But you have to be consistent. We're either going to run the formula or we're going to charge everybody whatever fair market is. So that's how you do that. But they can't receive, you can't rent that dwelling to them at the same rate that you would rent it to a low income participant that falls, below 80%. You also need to track the amount of money. If you're going to put that 10% authority, you need to put that in your housing plan. Okay. So for example, if you get $365,000 a year, you're allowed to put away 10% of your funds to help the families that fall between 80 and 100% if your governing body decides that's what they want to do. So that amount would be $36,500. So you have a family, you're giving them help with the fair market rent. It's $698 worth of assistance. You multiply that times the 12 months in a year, and you're giving them $8,376 worth of assistance. Then you have a second family that comes in and you're helping them with home ownership. It's $850 a month times your 12 months comes out, to your $10,200 worth of assistance. You have a third family that comes in and you're giving them down payment assistance. Okay. You're giving them $7,400 worth of down payment assistance. Your total expenditures at this point are at $25,976. It gives you $10,524 of NAHASDA funds eligible to use. You have another family come in and they need $11,000 worth of assistance. You can't help them. You have to get a hold of HUD and tell them, I've only got $10,524 worth of authority left. Can you please help me with, less than $500 of assistance that I'm going to need, or am I allowed to service them? And they'll give you the yay or the nay. But you got to track that. Somebody's got to be tracking that constantly. So the area that we have the slippage in is when you get into your other program assistance for your non-low income families. If they fall between 80 and 100%, you give out $10,000 worth of down payment assistance for every family that qualifies. Well, if they fall between 80 and 100%, they're not allowed to receive the same amount of assistance. They're not allowed to receive $10,000 because that's what you're giving to your low-income people. You have to run a formula to see how much they actually, are allowed to have. So other assistance, including down payment to non-low-income families, cannot exceed the income of the family at 80% immediate income divided by the income of your non-low income family at the present value of the assistance to the family at 80% of median income. So same scenario, family of four in Seattle, $75,040. We give $10,000, out for families that are 80% or below median income. You would take the income of your low-income family at $75,040, divide it by the income of your non-low-income family. They make $88,000. That would come out to 0.85, okay? You take the 0.85 times the assistance, at 80%. You're giving them $10,000 in down payment assistance. Your non-low-income families, they're only going to be eligible for $8,500. Okay, we have a lot of slippage in that area. They say, no, we can give up to $10,000 per family. Not if they fall between 80 and 100%. They're not allowed to receive the same amount. So that's all outlined within that one document. Make sure that you keep a binder with those occupancy documents in them. They also have all the updated as of December or January of last year, all of the eligible deductions, veterans deductions and things like that. So what's HUD going to check? They're going to check to see if that participant is non-low income, if they're paying that appropriate rate up to fair market value. Make sure you check yourself first. So in those monitoring links that I talked about, that I give you in those examples, there is appendix items for occupancy, okay? These are, one of those examples. Native family with proof of enrollment, do you have that? If the family was not Native, do you have documentation for them being essential or their well-being to the community, or would they fall under the law enforcement? What's their annual income at the time of application? What's their family size? How many bedrooms? What's the income limit at the time of the application? Is the applicant eligible? Is the selection in accordance with the placement on the waiting list? The amount of assistance or purchase price that you give them. So those are some of the documents that they're going to look at, okay? Is the assistance price within the TDC? We talked about that. That's one of your documents in the reference materials. We cannot build over that TDC that's published. Do you have a signed contract for assistance? Did you record the useful life agreement? We're going to get into that over the next couple of days. Is the insurance equal to the amount of assistance? If it's over $5,000, they're supposed to have insurance, okay? Except in a rental unit. The rental unit, you insure the structure of the rental unit. They're responsible for their own contents. So you always try to get them to, get that renter's insurance to assure them, insure their own contents. Pre-occupancy inspection documented. Post-occupancy conducted in accordance with your maintenance or your inspection standards. Did you check and verify that there's no lead-based paint? Did you provide counseling to the family? Are they current on their payments? Does there appear to be any type of conflict of interest? Was HUD notified of the conflict of interest? We're going to get into that in the next couple of days too. Relocation, low income, 80 to 100% is the amount of assistance. Was it prorated? And then the other one is an ERR, which is an environmental review form. So there's all sorts of documents in there that if you check yourself, it'll tell you what you need to have to make sure that you hopefully pass that HUD monitoring. So eligible families, preference for tribal members and other Indian families. Your Indian housing plan for the tribe can require a preference, okay? When you write your A&O policy, you can put your preferences in there, okay? For housing or housing assistance provided through affordable housing activities assisted with grant amounts under the Act. So this is coming straight from the statute. To be given to the extent practicable to Indian families who are members of such tribe or other Indian families. In any case in which the applicable Indian housing plan for the tribe provides for preference under this paragraph, the recipient for the tribe shall ensure that the housing activities assisted with the grant amounts under this act for the tribe are subject to such preferences. We are exempt, okay? Exemption. The Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968 shall not apply to actions by federally recognized tribes and tribally designated housing entities of those tribes under this act, okay? We don't, the fair housing and things like that, we get the money on the behalf of low-income Native Americans. So we can give those preferences. It's not discrimination. We're awarded those monies to do that. So your tribal preference and selection, the regulations at 24 CFR 1120 permit recipients to provide preference to your Indian families who are members of your tribe or other Indian families if you have adopted those preferences in your admission and occupancy policy. You need to assure that those housing activities funded under NAHASDA are subject to that preference. So you can also set, there's preferences and there's priorities. Priorities to receive housing, tribal member, elderly, handicapped, disabled, veteran, but it has to be listed within your A&O policy and applied consistently. So there's different examples of some of the required tribal decisions. Are you going to charge a minimum or a maximum rent? Remember, if it's NAHASDA funds, we're not allowed to charge a family more than 30% of their adjusted income, unless they fall between 80 and 100% of median income. If it's discovered that you have charged a low-income participant more than 30%, you're going to have to pay them back. You'll get a finding. They'll go back in time and make you, until they can prove that, you're not overcharging them. You have to be really careful there. Verification of income. That's why you need to verify your tenants. Even if they're in a rent to own or a mutual help, whatever, if they're at max payment, you need to be able to prove that you weren't overcharging them. Might seem redundant to you, but you still have to do that on a yearly basis, just as well as having your boots in every single unit that you own, okay? So you need to verify the income of your participants. You should be informing them when they first become a tenant to notify you about, remember what we went through yesterday. If they have life-altering events, get a job, lose a job, change a job, have a baby, somebody moves out, somebody passes away, they become an elder. There's all sorts of things that will have cause and effect on that rent going up and down, okay? Head or co-head reach that senior status, so you can make sure that you don't inadvertently charge them more than that 30% of their income. So your policy required decisions. Are you going to allow the 10% cap on assistance of families 80 to 100%? Or do you just want to, is that all you want to serve as your low-income tribal members? That's up to you, okay? The other decision is they're low rent, they're low income when we put them in, and now they've got an increase in household income. Are you going to make them move? Got to decide that. Then you got to decide, are we going to charge them more? And that has to be in your A&O policy. And again, you have to be consistent. You do it for one, you do it for all. So if you're going to charge those program participants more than your low-income participants, you can charge them the current amount they're being charged, a fair market for your area, or the HUD formula used for over-income tenant calculations. Make sure you detail your decisions in your policy. When you're looking at your policy, does it speak about emancipated minors? If you're there as long as I was, it'll come up at some point. Either they have to be of this age, or if they're emancipated, you might allow them to apply before they're 18 or 21, Do you address in your policy the continuation of services for somebody who is no longer essential? When we went through that yesterday, and we talked about essential, you need to put right in the policy that you can deem them no longer essential, and you will ask them to move within 30 days or 60 days, Does your policy address continued services if your family is no longer low income, And then again, you need that deadline if you're going to ask them to move. But remember, you can't pick up a house and move within 30 days usually. That puts a lot of stress. I would ask you give them, 60, 90 days is preferable, okay? If a rental or a home ownership family was low income the time they entered, they subsequently become non-low income, are you going to let them continue to participate, okay? Same thing about somebody that takes over a home ownership unit, for instance, by inheriting it. Whether or not they can receive that same benefit as a low-income family is subject to your admission and occupancy policies. They don't count toward the 10% of who can be served, though, under that circumstances. So you need, to put language in your policy. Families who are initially low income but later experience an increase in income will not be included in our 10% cap on assistance to families between 80 and 100%. The family will not experience a reduction in assistance amount provided by, the housing entity, and they will not be asked to leave. That means you're not going to charge them more. You're going to let them stay there, and it's not going to go against your 10%. So you need to make those policy decisions. They should be in your A&O, policy. So the other thing that they are very, very picky about is your waiting list. Okay, your application and your waiting list. Your application forms address family characteristics, their estimated annual income, the appropriate size, location, and type of home for the family. You don't put a, family of 7 in a 2-bedroom house. If my sister tribe has 7 counties. You don't put them in Sault Ste. Marie if they live in Marquette. Those are, depending on how you are spread out. If you're in several areas, I work with tribes in California that are 100 miles apart. They're areas, but they have 2 distinct areas that are their reservations. Whether the family is suitable for participation in a housing program in accordance with your criteria, you always have to deem them suitable, and whether they could qualify for any preferences. So those are some of the things your application has to capture. You're going to, run a criminal lien, or you're going to ask them, have you been arrested? And all those questions. Written applications, okay? They should be time and date stamped when they are received. They should be accepted and processed to determine eligibility. Your staff should document all communication with your applicants and removals from your wait list. If you ever take somebody off a waiting list, you have to document it very, very well, or you'll get a finding. Cheryl Cosley took them off on May 6, 2025 at 2:45 because they called up and they asked to be removed from the waiting list because they just bought a unit. They just bought like a cabin or whatever they bought. Why, when, and who, all on there. You always try to see if they would please sign a paper asking to be removed from the list. So you have it in writing that you can attach to it. That sits a lot better than, one of the staff members taking them off. But HUD's going to go through your waiting list also. You need to be somebody should always be willing to have a private place and help an applicant complete an application. There's been times, where you have people that don't understand the English language very well, or they can't read very well. But even those that don't, depending on how it's structured, I'll read something totally different than Joe next door if I hand it to him. We're going to perceive and take things different ways. So you should always have a staff member willing to go through those with them also, okay? Your selection policies, you have to develop a selection policy. You can establish preferences for members of your tribe, people with special needs, veterans, and certain types of families. Your leases. Rental and homebuyer leases have to be written, okay? Your lawyers have to look at your leases. Those are one of the most important, besides your construction contracts, things that come out of your office. They have to state the rent and lease payment. If you have an admin fee, like for a mutual help or that type of program, who's responsible for what maintenance, okay? Timeline for adequate notice. If we need to go into your unit, we're going to give you 3 business days. We're going to give you 7, unless it's an emergency, inspection requirements. You will be required to have an inspection a minimum of once a year, unless we find something wrong, and then we will put you on a different schedule. And some of the reasons for termination. All of your application packages for every program that you offer should ask about your applicants' relationships with your decision makers. It's your conflict of interest statement, the applicant's name, the program they're applying for, their application date. I'm an employee or a board of commissioner or a tribal council member, and I'm applying for this. I'm a business partner of a housing employee, a housing board of commissioner, or a housing tribal council member. Or I am neither to all of the above. If you are a family member or a business partner to a housing employee or a board of commissioners or, tribal council, please state the name and your relationship to them. And then you have an acknowledgement. I understand that a public disclosure of my selection will be made. A copy of this disclosure will be submitted to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I've been notified of my opportunity to receive a copy of the conflict of interest policy. So you got to have one to receive additional information from the housing entity. I understand that this disclosure does not disqualify and or determine my application ineligible just because I'm related to somebody. On our, we're related to everybody. But these are one of the things that you should have. That's how you protect that's one of the mechanisms that they will look for to make sure that you have. So your eligibility screening, are you going to run criminal backgrounds? If you do, you got to run them on everybody. Okay, we ran them. Good idea. Landlord references, any outstanding debts, program-specific requirements, family composition, tribal enrollment, conflicts of interest, your relationship to your tribal, your decision makers, credit worthiness. If you're putting them in, into a rent to own or a home ownership program, is it going to be their principal residence? Definitely put that in your A&O policy. okay? You have to make sure that you address that. So ability to enter into an agreement, their maintenance history. If they've been in your housing 5 years ago and you kicked them out because they trashed it, are you going to let them back in again? First of all, they should pay for every bit of damage that they did. In some cases, we would not only, we would not take anybody in that owed us money. We would not take their application. Okay, that was part of our A&O policy. Did damage to one of our units and came back, paid off. Well, in some cases, we would double the security deposit. Why? Because of your previous history. And then you have verification timeframes and employment stability, depending on what type of a program that they're going into. Your waiting list establishes your order of assistance to your qualified applicants, okay? They don't get on to that list unless they're qualified. You implement preferences, priorities, ensure that you have fair and equitable treatment. It serves as a source of data and about need and demand by unit, size, type, and location. Now, one of the things I failed to put a slide in here, okay? On the applications, I have been in some places where you can't even get back to the housing authority, especially when they're housing departments, okay? So the person up front is receiving that application package. You would definitely need to keep 2 dates on there in that case, 2 signature lines. One, the date that it was received at your tribal facility and who received it. Okay, we got it at this point. And then it would have another date on it once they deemed that application complete. Housing employee's signature and date on it. Because they're going to come back and they're going to say to your governor, I've been on the waiting list since December of 2017 and still haven't got a house. Well, that could be because we notified you of 2018 that you were missing the following documents and that your application was not complete. You have not been on the waiting list. You need to be able to prove that because they try to go above your head when they sit for too long. All of that correctly. So 2 signatures. So your wait list options, number of waiting list, are you going to keep them for every different program? What to include on your list? Is it going to be electronic? How do you join it? How do you purge it? You be careful purging your waiting list. HUD's going to look at that. Don't remove people from a waiting list without a policy. Always keep as an inactive application. So you should have an inactive file, filed by year. And you never get rid of those. With signature, reason, and data staff person, that remove that application from that file. Now, this is one of my forms that I used at my housing authority that I created because I got tired of people coming in and saying, well, you never let me know. Well, I tried to get a hold of you and this is no longer your number or this is no longer your address. So create a I can be contacted at form. This form has to be completed by all applicants over 18 years of age. The following address is where I can be reached to receive mail from the housing entity. In the event I need to be contacted for any reason, including but not limited to denial of housing or notification of a unit availability, it's going to be my responsibility to contact the housing entity and change my address if I move. Any future correspondence will be forwarded to the above address regarding my business with the housing entity. That takes you off the hook. It's up to them to update that form, okay? Put something like that in there. It'll create less havoc for you in the long run. So standard verification forms, income, trust income, savings, pensions, landlord verifications. Your forms, your verification forms should capture names, position, telephone number, email, anybody that you get information about that person from, okay? Should capture their current and anticipated earnings and fluctuating pay rates and hours. Okay. With my husband off the reservation at a construction company, I would have found out that the first week that they work, they'll work 36 to 40 hours. From that point until the end of the year, they will work no less than 50. They have at least 10 hours of. Could have got that by one phone call. You need to find that out because, you know, you include that in that income. You might want to consider including self-addressed stamped envelopes with each verification form that you mail out. Authorization or release of information, Privacy Act statement, that's that HUD form 9886. All adult family members and spouse must sign. Anybody over the age of 18. So you also need to track the people within the household. Have some kind of jiggler. We used to use 5-year calendars when one of their children were turning 18 because you're going to need them to come in and sign that form. It can be used between regular re-exams to verify unreported income and the applicant's certification that income and other information is accurate and complete. So this is what the form looks like. You also need to have somewhere on there that you're either going to have them sign multiple forms for you. Okay. But it was this many years old before I learned this, that form is only good for 15 months. So every time they come in your office, you better be having them sign that release of information so it extends you out longer. Okay. Anytime you do a research, definitely get all those done. But other times too. And it can only be used for the sources listed on the form. So you make sure you list everybody, all utility companies in the state of Washington, or, you know, just make sure that it covers everybody that you could possibly, you know, banking institutions in the state of Washington. That will cover that. So your release forms, obtaining information for verification purposes requires a signed consent for the release of information from the family member whose information is being requested. Make sure to hold an occupancy and an orientation move-in meeting with all new tenants to ensure that your occupants completely understand what is required of them, what they can expect and or require of your housing program. Copies of your applicable policies should be provided to new occupants with sufficient time to answer questions. Make sure to advise them that they're responsible for the conduct of their guest. Inform them that they are to immediately report any life-changing events such as births, move-outs, new jobs, loss of jobs, deaths, tenant becoming an elder, divorce. Inform them that you're not allowed, again, to charge them over 30% of that adjusted income, so they need to keep you informed. And your procedure for people moving into the house, okay? Because we ran a criminal lien. They weren't allowed to move people into their house without our permission because we had to go through that process. So you're going to have to, that's dependent on your A&O policy there too. So I hate to say this, but your A&O policy is almost the most important document that you will have within your housing authority as far as rules for your tenants go, okay? So your move-in inspections, you conduct a move-in inspection with the family prior to ensure standard condition of unit, okay? Don't let them give them a key, you know, we got to get out. Can we start moving stuff? Your maintenance guys will help you. You know, you can't do that. Not only that, if you do it for one, you're supposed to do it for everybody that ever asks you to do that. And the minute one of them puts a hole in a wall and then doesn't claim it, so you just say, no, I'm sorry. You can have the key when the unit is ready. Try to do those conversations, lease signing, all of that stuff with them before the day before they move in. You can do that 2 weeks before the unit is ready. Because if you wait until the day that they are ready to move into that house, you're going to be telling them all this stuff that they got to remember, giving them all these policies, and they're going to be thinking, I got to get a garbage can. I still need to get a shower curtain for the, bathroom upstairs. I'm missing this. That's what's going through their head, not what you're normally teaching them. And I've been told that, so I know that that's true. Try to do that ahead of time also. Have your leaseholders sign in your inspection reports. Don't move in anything before the inspection or the issuance of the keys. When your maintenance people go into a unit and you ever see damage, okay, have them pick up the phone. When you have an iPhone, have the other guy take a picture of the iPhone. It's got the date, it's got the time on it, next to whatever. This is when we discovered it. We had them videotape the inspections, and then we keep them on file. No, this is not the way that you got the unit. Here's the video. That will save you in the long run. So that participant information that you collect, okay, it's called PII. It's personal identifiable information. You have to be really, really careful with how you store and who has access to that. Okay. Your file should be in a locked room. We actually ended up putting it in a closet sort of that was built with all our files in it that had a code on it. Only certain staff had those codes to be able to get into those files. And you signed out the file. And if it meant you had to get somebody else to let you in because you didn't have access to that, they would have that signature present, but you controlled the flow of that information. And we weren't allowed to leave empty files on a desk while we took off for, the weekend, or that we took off for, vacation. Grab the files, put them back in the room, sit them on top of the file cabinet if you have to, if you're going to be right back Monday morning and it's Friday. Nobody else is going to be in there. But make sure that they're locked up, okay? It's considered protected, and you have to protect it. It's got social security numbers, birth certificates, all that stuff in there. So there is a program guidance on that, 2014-05, and it talks about, should you need to send anything to the HUD office, the procedure that ONAP needs to follow and you need to follow to be able to send that information. Okay, so make sure that you do that also. Recipient responsibilities, that you have to protect that information and the procedure for sending it to ONAP. Right-click the folder or file you want to encrypt. They actually want you to encrypt this stuff if you are forced. Not very often are we forced to send it to HUD, but sometimes you are. Okay, so that's the guidance on that for your information. You should also have a confidentiality policy. Okay, your Board of Commissioners, depending on the interaction, your tribal council, and all of your staff should have to sign that. Whereas the housing entity provides decent, safe, sanitary housing to low-income Native Americans in accordance with HUD guidelines, where we seek to protect the interests and residents of the applicants by prohibiting the exploitive use of personal information to the extent permitted by tribal and state law. The housing entity is also mandated by HUD confidentiality requirements to protect tenant information and housing records. In all cases, the release of any housing record requires the prior written approval of the housing authority's executive director. Therefore, it be resolved that it's a policy of the housing entity to protect the interest of the people we serve to the maximum extent permitted by law. All employees, members of the authority, including the housing commissioners and tribal council, are required to abide by this standard. Only inspectors, auditors, and investigators, and others who are engaged in their normal functions as approved by HUD, may have access to confidential information concerning our resident or our applicants. So when I get a contract, it's funneled through HUD. Okay. So I would have, if I was on site helping you with your files, I would be one of those persons that were allowed to see those things. Your tribal council chair, any member, does not have the right to come in and look at a tenant file. Even when you do, the criminal histories, for instance, I would do the criminal history. We would give them a redacted, retyped version. It was a tribal member or a non-tribal member. It was a male or a female. This was their age. This is what they did. This was the sentencing portion. They don't get to hands-on touch those things. You should be protecting the information, even when you're talking about tenants and their account receivables. Tenant number, blah, 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 and they should be on a numbered system of some sort, so they don't know who they're dealing with. You have to protect them from that. I was at a housing authority at one point, and I sat through one of their meetings, and I watched them talk about this tenant owing all sorts of money. And their father was sitting on the board of commissioners. You should have seen the look. I knew by the name, but there's lots of people with my last name, at that tribe. My maiden name, there, lots of them here. So I didn't know for sure, but as soon as I saw his face and the coloring in it, I knew that that was his family. He got up and went and paid the tenant account receivables. You can't put people in that position either. So you need to discuss, we have a tenant in a 3-bedroom home. They've been in there for roughly a year. They're 4 months in arrears. You don't need to put their name on there. So you need to protect all the way around. Find mechanisms to do that. So that National Crime Information Center, we can use those criminal history records for the purposes of applicant screening. Okay. You make sure that you have a copy of their application before you run the criminal lien. That's how I kept out of trouble, because when we first started, we were subject to state police audit. I passed mine, and there was tribal departments, cops, things like that in different places that didn't pass theirs. I passed mine because I had the stapled application on the other side of my paperwork, a copy of it. Okay. You can also use it for lease enforcement, eviction, and the screening of any housing entity prospective employee. Just because of the fact that, we see some things, we have access to all that information, we have access to cash, we have access to families. They shouldn't have records either, okay? So you may wish to have a policy that restricts or forbids occupancy to tenants, potential tenants, home buyers who have criminal convictions of any kind or specific types. To aid in applicant screening, lease enforcement, and eviction. In this case, tenants do include home buyers who are purchasing their home through a lease purchase agreement, and home owners seeking housing assistance, down payment, rehab, whatever. If you do it for everybody. Okay, you can't. That's one thing they're going to look at. So, how many tribes and TDHEs, how do you receive criminal conviction information on applicants for employments, on adult applicants, housing assistance? So it is through the NAHASDA statute that allows us to get information from the National Crime Information Center. Now, it'll vary from place to place. A lot of tribes will use if they have gaming, they have a way to get that information already. Some go through their police departments. Some go through courthouse records. You have to find out the mechanism that works in your area. Call your other, pueblos. Call your other places. Do you do this, and how do you get your information? Lock and key. There's serious rules for those information and then there's a different procedure. It'll sometimes come back, this applicant has an FBI background, and then you got to go get a fingerprint. And I've had to do that. And our tribal cops seem to smear those almost every time, then we'd have to send them back. And they cost additional money also. And you're not really supposed to pass on the cost of doing that criminal background. So, but it's a good idea to do them. So how is the recipient to use criminal conviction information. With regards to adult tenants and applicants for housing assistance, you'll use the criminal conviction information described at 1,150. It's where you read about it in the regs. Only for applicant screening, lease enforcement, and eviction actions. With regards to applicants for employment, remember I told you you're allowed to run those also. The recipient shall use the criminal conviction information described at 1,150 for the purposes set out in Section 208 of NAHASDA. Your criminal conviction information described at 150 may disclose only to any person who has a job-related need for that information, who is an authorized officer, employee, or representative of your, you as a recipient, or the owner of housing assisted under NAHASDA. So you set up your own protocols. I would never hand a criminal lien over to the person. They never got to see their own. I will give you the same redaction, and then I would ask permission. I know your girlfriend is with you. I know your wife is with you, but I need to ask your permission before she sits in the room, or would you like to go do this in private? Because sometimes they don't want that information passed on. So you need to keep that information confidential. You'll keep all conviction record information it receives from your law enforcement agencies in files separate from all of your other housing records. So my deputy director, she wasn't the one that had those. I had access as the executive director and the most closed-lipped person on my staff. You would have had to use a crowbar to get any information out of her. She had that information. And you need to put that in writing in your meeting minutes, who the other person is, okay? The criminal conviction records will be kept under lock and key under the custody and control of the recipient's housing executive director, lead official, or his designee for such records. So she kept them. She kept the files. She kept them under lock and key. I would make the decisions most often, but she was the keeper of the records, so those criminal conviction records can only be accessed with the written permission of the tribe or the tribe's TDHE. This is stated within 208 of the NAHASDA statute and those particular regulations. Okay, so you have to establish a system of records management that ensures any criminal record received from law enforcement is maintained, confidentially, not misused, and properly disseminated, destroyed once the purpose for which that record was requested has been accomplished. You'd have to shred it. On this date, we ran a criminal history on this person and he passed. Record was destroyed on this day. They must be kept under lock and key, under control and custody of the ED or, designee. The tenant or applicant file should document the criminal background was conducted, the applicant passed or did not pass that check, and the source of the information. Criminal background record checks should be retained separately from the applicant file, and for those applicants denied housing until the expiration period for which they have to request an informal hearing and to challenge your decision. They need to be destroyed at the expiration of the period or at the conclusion of that hearing or any litigation. You can read about that at 1050, 52, 54. We'll give you additional information. So what would happen is it would go, and I told you, what information they got. They would vote. I was under the tribal council. They would vote yes or no, let them in. They wouldn't know who it was. We would take all those votes back. We knew who voted which way. I would mark those because my chairman's job was to break or make a tie, make or break a tie. And if they got let in, they'd never know who it was. If they didn't pass the vote, we would get a hold of them and tell them you got, I think it was 20 days. It has to be in your policy how long they have to actually, challenge that decision or appeal it. And they have to do it in person in ours. That was one of ours also. And then they would come in front of the tribal council and they would have a bigger version of what went on, and we would tell them who it was. They would come in, we would ask if they wanted anybody present, or we would have them sit out in a different room, and they would come into the conference room in front of the tribal council. And you would basically, you could ask about it. Well, I see that you had a drunk driving and you hit somebody, or you ran through a house, or whatever the reason, whatever it was, you had a breaking and entering. Because you have to realize, when you have this information and you let them in your housing, let's say I knew somebody that had 3 B&Es. I let them into the apartment building, and then they burglarized one of my apartments. I would fully expect my tenant that let him in there. So you have to be careful, because information is power, as well as it can be detrimental in some cases. So you have to make sure that you make good decisions, and the council would either yes or no. Once this person was in front of them, we always had somebody in law enforcement, and they would usually start out with, housing is a privilege. That is not anything that, we owe you, basically. It's a privilege. Can you tell us why we should, we're charged with protecting all of our tribal members, why we should let you in here? And sometimes at that point, they would put an addendum on that lease, and they'd have to agree to that in order to be put on the waiting list. No alcohol, or no traffic, no offenses besides a traffic of charge, different things like that. No guns within the unit. No domestic abuse, whatever it was. And the lawyer we basically had a folder of them after a while, of addendums that they would sign. So you can do it that way also. Has to be destroyed. You have to maintain all of those properly. Your policy and your meeting minutes should reflect who your designee is. And you have to be very careful with those records. So that guidance, there's, updating for instructions for getting that history, and your drug abuse treatment information, because some of us have healing to wellness courts now. Same thing, you hear that same kind of background. You sometimes have to change some of your rules. You talk it over with your tribal council, your legal department, because, for instance, if you're in the healing to wellness, the cops can come in at any time that they're within that court system, and check the house for drugs, alcohol, things like that, with no warrant. They give up that right. But if that is your unit, you have to make sure that you've got that language covered also. Okay. And then you keep those files the same way. They have to be separate. So your payments charged, what's your maximum and your minimum rent, your home buyer payments, you cannot charge them over 30% of their income, period, unless they fall between 80 and 100%. Then you can charge them more. You have to use the formula or the fair market. Now, if they owe you money, their rent base can't be over 30%, but then you can charge them more for the payback agreement. Okay. Flat or income adjusted rents, yeah, you can do that. You still got to run the calculation that you're not charging them over 30% of the adjusted income. You have to do income verification just to make sure that you're not overcharging them also, okay? That's what you have to make sure your policy is consistent with. Can you charge non-low income family rent or home buyer payments more than 30%? Yes, you can charge and this is right from, this shows you what the rules look like. If I went to the regs at 1,130, it's in a question and answer format. Sometimes they don't ask the question that you want, and you got to move to the statute or some other place for the guidance. May a recipient charge a non-low income family rent or home buyer payment more than 30% of the family's adjusted income? The answer in the regs is yes. A recipient can charge a non-low income family rents or home buyer payments, which are more than 30% of the family's adjusted income. Okay, so that's how the regs actually read. Now, utilities can be considered a part of the rent or home buyer payment if you decide to define that within your program. Okay, under 1937 Housing Act, we had to give them a utility allowance. We do not have to do that anymore. And it cost your subsidy a lot of money when you do that. So I teach in certain classes how to look at putting a rent structure together, how much it'll cost, the cause and effect of even $100 or a $200 utility allowance will have on your annual budget. Okay, it'll cost you a lot, and it's a yearly expense, less revenue that's going to come out. So you can define rents and home buyer payments to exclude utilities if you want. Now the insurance. Recipients shall not require insurance on units assisted by grants to families for privately owned housing if you have no risk for loss or exposure, or you give the family assistance in the amount of $5,000 or less. Okay. If you're giving them $10,000 in down payment assistance or rehab or whatever, you have to have insurance from them. You have to be on their policy. I've got some language that goes, I believe, in the useful life portion that'll give you language for that. Okay. You have to always get and require insurance from your contractors. And we have flood insurance requirements that we have to follow also. Okay. When you go to purchase insurance for your properties, we're supposed to follow procurement, 3 bids or more. That's the basic rule of thumb for procurement. The NAHASDA statute or the regulations actually allow recipients may purchase the required insurance without regard to competitive selection procedures from nonprofit insurance entities owned and controlled by the recipients, which have been approved by HUD. What does that mean in plain language? AMRIND. Okay, those are owned by our housing authorities. If you're utilizing AMRIND for insurance for your properties, you don't have to go through the procurement policy and the process unless you want to. If you're not utilizing them, you need to be going and getting bids from several companies. Okay, it's a regular procurement. Can you use grant funds to purchase insurance for privately owned housing to protect NAHASDA grant amount spent on that housing? Well, yes, you can, but you've opened Pandora's box, because if you give it to one tribal member, you should probably be purchasing that insurance for all of the tribal members. And unless you have a lot of money, you want to rethink that or think about it very, very carefully. Okay. So insurance sample policy language. Okay, this is what I was talking about. I thought I had it in the other part. Housing funds shall not be spent on the acquisition, construction, rehab of any home or parcel of land not insured against casualty, fire, and flood if necessary. Any home in a floodplain as designated by the tribe's environmental resource staff shall be adequately covered for flood damage or destruction to the home. The foregoing requirement shall commence at the time housing funds are first spent, shall continue the entire time in which the housing entity has a financial interest in a home or parcel of land as applicable. Participants in your rental assistance program, programs that don't count basically toward the insurance requirements, temporary housing, emergency assistance, not exercise the option to purchase under your lease to own, shall not be required to insure their housing unit, home or rental unit. Nevertheless, the housing department shall encourage participants who rent to procure renter's insurance. So we always did that. Your housing entity shall be named as a loss payee under all required insurance policies for the period of the conditional grant under a program. Okay, so it's going to go hand in hand with your useful life requirements, or until the conditional grant obligation is satisfied. The participant shall provide the housing entity with certificates of insurance evidencing the required insurance. So you're going to need to write all of that up along with your useful life. Anything over $5,000. So that is the guidance found at 2014-03. It is in your program guidance, and it talks about when that insurance is required, your useful life affordability period, the term of repayment or forgiveness of an agreement for all parts of assistance for privately owned housing, and the useful life, like I said, requirements there. So that goes through what you need to have in place, okay? So when do housing units not have to be insured? This is from the 1000 regs. If you provide $3,500 in emergency assistance to a private homeowner, the assistance is not subject to a repayment agreement of any kind. No insurance requirements apply. That's because it's under the $5,000 threshold. When must housing units be insured in accordance with the recipient's useful life or affordability period? If you provide $25,000, still makes me jump. And $25,000 in down payment assistance to a private homeowner that includes a mandatory 10-year useful life, your affordability period, and a 5-year repayment clause, and the insurance requirements described would apply for the 10 years from the date that assistance is provided. And we'll get into that a little bit more tomorrow with the useful life. So our flood insurance, we got a problem with flood insurance. Most of our reservations have not been mapped by FEMA. If you are in a FEMA identified special flood hazard area, it requires you to either participate in the National Flood Insurance Program or carry private flood insurance. Under 1038, the Flood Disaster Protection Act of 1973, as amended, you may not permit the use of federal financial assistance for acquisition, construction purposes, including rehab, in an area identified by FEMA as having a special flood hazard unless the following conditions are met. The community in which the area is situated is participating in the flood insurance program in accordance with 202A of the Flood Disaster Protection Act of 73, or less than a year has passed since FEMA notification regarding the flood hazards. For this purpose, the community is your government entity, such as an Indian tribe, an authorized tribal organization, Alaska Native Village, an authorized Native organization, or a municipality or county that has authority to adopt and enforce floodplain management regulations for your area, and the community is participating in the National Flood Insurance Program. Flood insurance on the building is obtained in compliance with Section 102A of the Flood Disaster Protection Act. And it's provided that the financial assistance, if it's in the form of a loan or an insurance or guarantee of a loan, the amount of flood insurance required need not exceed the outstanding principal balance of the loan, need not be required beyond the term of the loan. Okay, and we are running behind, guys, but we started late too also, and I will try to make sure that I get your questions answered, Griton. And thank you, Mr. Zuni, Tribal Councilman, for joining us. So NAHASDA planning, IHP, APR, really, really important. If you don't get your IHP in, you don't get your money, okay? And there's a period of time in there, so be real careful with that. Your Indian Housing Plan is your document, okay, that you have to submit to HUD. Basically spells out, this is the amount of our grant, this is what we're going to do with our money this year. Okay, that's what your IHP does. Your APR tells you this is the amount we got, this is the amount we spent, this is what we did. It's a mechanism. So Congress now has a way to find out what we did, but because for years they had no mechanism to track how much was built, how many people were assisted, how many jobs were created in Indian country. I remember pre-IHP and APR, why these came about, so that's the reasoning behind that. So we can report to Congress what we've done with those funds, basically. So the statutory requirements are found at 102 and 103 of NAHASDA and 24 CFR 1000. To receive our funds under NAHASDA, your IHP and APR has to be submitted annually. HUD must determine your IHP and APR to be in compliance with NAHASDA, and somebody is certifying to the fact, and it's either your tribal council or your board of commissioners is signing off every year saying that you have all of this stuff in place, that you have all of these policies. So you have to make sure that your organization has them. Now, If you have a board of commissioners, they're responsible for that. But overall, the tribe is the recipient. The tribal council is responsible for all of that. So you make sure as tribal council also that your board of commissioners are doing this and they're certifying that you have all of these things in place. Make sure that you have them. Make sure they're compliant. Make sure that they're up to date. You're certifying, to quite a few different things. That you have A&O policies, that you have mechanisms to charge rents. Some of your key components in your IHP, that 1-year plan of action, there is reference material in there so you can read about it. It's a little bit outdated, but it's the only one that is printed to this point. The reason I'm saying that it's outdated is because it refers to EPIC, and now we use GEMS to actually file these documents. Okay, so your IHP is your Indian Housing Plan, required by HUD in order to receive your block grant funds. It's a roadmap. Okay, this is what we're doing with our money. This is how we're servicing our people this year. It spells out how you as a recipient intend to use funds that they receive under your block grant. Your activities plus your budget equals your IHP. You submit that IHP, APR, the tribe or the tribally designated housing entity does it. If they've been designated, oftentimes in California, the rancherias will have multiple rancherias. I call it an umbrella tribe. I know that the Pueblos were under one for a long time and they've all, split off. I work with 2 Pueblos that were under one umbrella at one time. They can actually submit one IHP on behalf of all of them, or the separate ones for every single one of them that says what they're going to do with the money for that particular year. Okay. If it's a single IHP for all the tribes within the jurisdiction, you have to make sure that you have tribal certifications from your tribes allowing to submit that. So you submit your IHP 75 days prior to the start of your program year. Okay. It's supposed to be an effective management tool. It allows you to have them in place by the start of your program year. If you don't get it done, you could lose your money for a year. Now you're allowed to use your A&P cost to have somebody prepare your IHP if you need to. I would suggest if you are ever in the case where you lose your person that does your IHP or your APR, you contact your HUD office. They do not want you to lose your money under any circumstance. Like I said, you can pay somebody to do it. Chances are they'll say, duplicate last year's, submit it, even though it's wrong, and we'll fix it. They want to stop that clock from ticking so they don't have to take that money back, because that's the last thing any, HUD does not want to do that. They're there actually to help you. If our congressional appropriations are delayed, so we get our program year estimate and it's usually available and you utilize that. If it's not, you utilize last year's information, and then once the information is distributed, you update your IHP internally. You don't have to send it back to HUD. And then you make sure your APR, your annual performance report, is correct. Okay, so you update the APR to include the actual amount, and that is actually required. So extensions can be granted under exceptional circumstances, but HUD can't waive that due date outside of the statutory limit provided in Section 101 of NAHASDA. So you can request your waiver of your deadline before it's due, after it's due. They can only give you 90 days. So if your APR is due on, October 1st, you have 90 days and you have no money if you don't get one in there. Okay. Just work with HUD, call them, tell them where you're at. They will help you. Now, our appropriations, especially if you're small. I was a small housing authority when I first started, kept building and building and building. And it depends on how good you are at collecting rents. If your appropriations are delayed, you can access interim funding. HUD will put out a notice. You have to actually contact your HUD office. I always called them first. The HUD office, you know, it would have to go in writing after you find out that it's there and who to give it to. It's usually the administrator, and they'll check your locks balance. If you don't have a lot of money in your locks, they'll allow you to get your, you know, money up front, or to get some of it anyway. To take advantage of this flexibility, the recipient's authorizing official has to submit that written request to HUD. But you always start out by calling them, you know. So we use locks, e-locks. We used to dial for dollars. Now you do it over the computer. Make sure that if you guys are in this position, or you're the authorizing official, that you get on there and you don't let yourself, and I hate to say it, it's get locked out of locks. It's really, really important, because it's a bear to get back in there. Just go in and query it, you know, once a month. I used to have it on my calendar to make sure that I wouldn't get locked out. Query locks, just to get into the system and make sure you don't do it. But the thing about locks is most of our tribes do it on a reimbursement basis, because of the fact that when you draw down those locks funds, you have 3 days to expend that money, or you have to pay it back. That's why you do it on a reimbursement basis, because sometimes you could make the draw on a Thursday, you get back in the office Monday, and your 3 days have expired. It got dropped, you know, so you have to really be careful there. That's why most of the tribes do it, like I said, on a reimbursement basis. So we now have to use GEMS. It came up, first thing that came around when they said we had to use GEMS, this is a new way that we actually report, is our SF 425s went from quarterly to yearly, unless you're an investment tribe, okay? It stops duplicative stuff, and it has a place where they can, you know, regenerate, and everything's filed and supposedly accessible now. So you can go back and get your old reports to look at them. Hopefully it'll help us work better. So there's active links in here, the GEMS website, self-registration, login, the user guide, which you have to sometimes grab to find out how to authorize your tribal people, you know, and it tells us that we no longer use Epic. So that came about in 2023. And then the 425, like I said, rules, unless you're an investment tribe, we only do it yearly. Now, there's an active link to the registration portal and your signature attestation page. I can't say that this late in the day. And it's hopefully will be good information for you to become familiar with our reporting protocol and place that we actually utilize to find, you know, the information and your 425 information. Okay, so as they continue to develop future releases of GEMS, we're going to use that for different types of reporting, and we will be required to do that. Grantees will be notified of additional functions and requirements. They'll do it through program guidance or those Dear Tribal Leader letters. Remember I said you don't have to be a tribal leader to read that section. You need to get into Code Talk, and that's where you go for all the updates, because that's where they let us know all the new rules, okay? So you can request HUD approval to submit via email or post should you be in one of those locations that are so rural that you have no reliable internet. And I have been in one or two of them in my visits. And not even up in rural Alaska either. It was in strange places. So if you have any question regarding the notice, you can email ONAP GEMS to give you further information on how to use that system. So when you use your IHP or your APR, you have to remember programs and projects are two different things. A program is an ongoing activity. They're in every single IHP. It's your maintenance, your administration, you know, your projects have a starting and an ending date. So they're dependent upon how much you're going to spend, your funding decisions for that year. How many houses am I going to develop? How much rental assistance am I going to give? Am I going to run, a down payment assistance. So your IHP is broke down into sections: your cover page, housing needs, program descriptions, maintaining your 37 Housing Act units. Everything built before 1996 is a 1937 Housing Act. They came with a subsidy. They call it CAS, Current Assisted Stock. HUD is more picky about those particular units and that money than anything else you will have. So take care of them, make sure that they're always rented, make sure that they are put online, maintenance done, put a new tenant whenever you move somebody out so you don't jeopardize that subsidy. It's the most useful thing that you have, okay, money-wise, if you have any of those. So maintaining those units, your budget, other submission items, and the certifications that you have to make, which are in 7 through 9. So your cover page gives you your grant number, recipient program year, federal fiscal year, tribe. You're going to need your DUNS number, your tax ID number, your CR, and SAM expiration date. It's a good idea to have somebody put those on a board somewhere so you have them. Should your executive director get fired? Should they walk out in a fit of rage? Whatever happens, you need to have access to that, and you need to know when your due dates are, okay? So require that. Have them put it in a password book and keep it in the safe. Whatever you have to do, somebody has to have access to those numbers, okay? Your needs, you describe the types of needs for your recipients. How many low-income families? How many, what do they need? What's the description of how your activities are going to meet your needs? Well, I'm going to build units, so I'm going to help my low-income people, provide them housing. Your geographic distribution of funds. Well, it's all going to be within Chippewa County, program descriptions and your outputs. What are you going to do? What is the activity it's under? What is the intended outcome? Who is going to be the beneficiaries of that assistance? And how many are you going to try to do? What's your planned output? So you don't combine home ownership and rental activities, construction, acquisition, and rehab. If you're constructing 5 home ownership units and 5 rental, they would be 2 separate activities, okay? So this is the outcomes and outputs. What program-specific program is going to be funded? What is the eligible activity? And there's a pull-down list that you pick from. What is the outcome? What's your intended goal? You pick a list again from the EWONAP goals and how many units or households are planned. So this was one of mine. When I first tried to get, mortgaging on the reservation. A recipient's going to provide down payment assistance to first-time homebuyers who wish to buy in the Tri-County area. The eligible activity, it's down payment and closing cost. The outcome, we're going to assist our renters to become homeowners. Who's going to be assisted? Well, we're going to assist our low-income families. The level and type of assistance, it's a $5,000 cap, and it's going to be a grant. I was trying to stay under the useful life requirements. $5,000 isn't enough sometimes, so I think we upped it to 10. But planned output, we're going to try to do 4 units the first year. Okay, so that was an example. So this is guidance on allowability, outcomes, and outputs, because depending on what it is, it's measured by unit, by dollars, by household. And there's an example for your use, just, in case you need that. And then we have what we call demo dispo. Those current assisted stock that we were talking about, we used to have a program where you could demolish, well, you still do actually, and I utilized that. I had a 10-unit project that was built for the Southwest. It had glass windows in it. It was hardly insulated. It had very thin roofing, no snow load whatsoever. And I had to go and use Indian Health, BIA, architects, engineers, get all of these, estimates and show that it was cheaper for me to demolish those or remove them and then build on that existing footprint than it was to rehab it. So it's a demo dispo. I was demolishing it and just disposing of it. And I built right on those footprints, and I preserved that current assisted stock, those subsidies for those 10 units continued. There's a year trigger, okay? And if you can't build within the year, you get a hold of HUD immediately, and then you have to get a hold of the Formula Center and say, we had a problem. I can't do it within a year. We still have snow here, by the way, in my yard, because our frost laws are, can't build right yet. And we're going to have snow by Halloween. So you have a very small period. So I actually had to do that under one project and say, I can't get it done within the year. We need this extension. So when it's current assisted stock, you have that 1 year ticker that you always have to be aware of, even for fires and things like that, should you come across that. So you have sources and uses of funds, the funds on hand at the beginning of the year, what you expect to receive, anticipated expenditures for every funding source, anticipated unexpended funds for each source at the end of the year, and you include your receipt and use of your program income. And there's program income reference material in there to help understand what that is and how you can utilize that, okay? Uses of funds, prior and current use of your block grant funds anticipated, and other funds anticipated to be used. And then 6 is your other submission items, your useful life, your model activities, your assistance to your over-income tribal members, tribal preference, your administration, and if you are in an extended, what they call formula area. And then you have certifications, tribal certifications if you're utilizing tribal wage rates, self-monitoring and compliance, okay? And the timeframes, they have 60 days to review once you submit your IHP. And then if you want to amend it or change it at any time, they have 30 days for the second go round to approve that. Your review points is it complete? Are all the required elements included? Are all eligible activities, are they all eligible activities under our statute? And are all the sections, consistent? And a revision is only required if you're going to add a new activity or you are going to reduce the amount of money that you had planned to take care of those current assisted stock, those 1937 subsidized units, okay? That's the only reason that you have to do a revision. So your federal fiscal year is always October 1st to September 30th in advance of your calendar year. 2025 started on October 1st to 24, ends September 30th of 2025. And your program year could be any one of the quarters, basically. October 1st, January 1st, April 1st, or July 1st. Your due date of your IHP is going to be dependent upon your chosen program year. And you can change it if you guys want to. We did. And those are your IHP due dates and your deadline, waiver deadlines on here. So do not, make sure that you get those in on time. Sometimes, like I said, Congress doesn't appropriate funds. They won't, I'm just going to leave it at that. Sometimes Congress does not pass that budget in a timely fashion. In those cases, HUD will run an estimate and you prepare your documents using that estimate, okay? That's the easiest way for me to say that politically correctly. Your IHP, your APR guidance, if it's the final appropriation is unknown at the time it's due, you can base your budget on your estimated amount, or you can use your previous year. And then, like I said, you correct that on your APR, okay? For anybody, a recipient who has been found in compliance, once that money's released, they will start your grant process immediately, HUD will. So it's good to have that done and sitting there. As you can see, I'm at the Pueblos a lot next week. So if your recipient adds a new activity, reduces its support for 1937 Act housing, remember I told you how very, very strict they are about that. You need to make sure that it is reflected in your APR submissions also, okay? Be careful there. Housing needs description, how many units are needed, what type of housing, things like that. Your tribe will need at some point to do some type of an assessment of what your tribal members want. We found out, first of all, they wanted home ownership. And then after we built like 200 units of home ownership, they wanted apartment buildings for the 35-year-old sons that were still living with their parents that were unmarried. So we built apartment buildings, and they have been full to capacity, ever since. Find out what your people want. We tried, when I got here, there was some of our elders in an elder complex. They hated it. They wanted their own individual houses, so that's what we built for them. And then had to build sheds because they have a lot of stuff. So find out, this will give you guidance on things that you need if they want rehab programs and things like that. So these are the areas of program activity descriptions, model activities, crime prevention. We're going to use down payment assistance, acquisition of land for housing, things like that. And then this will deal with, it's in your IHP, what you base your useful life agreement on, okay? Your affordability period, your useful life period, it's in your IHP. But we're going to get in, and I will describe that later in the week. So please come back. I'm sorry, you guys were so late. So you have to submit, tribal and Indian preference. If you're going to give preference to tribal members, other Indian families, your model and over income activities, if they're proposed for funding, you have to describe the undertaking and the households you're going to serve. If they are over income between 80 and 100%, you make sure that 10% authority is put into your IHP, and then you certify. You do all those tribal certifications, complying with the Civil Rights Act, the 504 Rehab Act, age discrimination. If you receive less than 200,000, that you have tribal members that fall between 80 and 100% of median income, or actually below 80%. I'm sorry there. That you maintain adequate insurance, that you have admission and occupancy policies, that you have rent and home buyer payment policies in place. And then it talks about tribal wage certification. So we'll talk about that also later on in the week. So your administrative and planning costs, depending on how much you get. If you get more than 500,000, you're allowed to use 20%. If you receive less than 500,000, 30%. You can use it to prepare your IHP, your APR, staff overhead, carrying out your IHP activities, challenging your formula, overall program cost, administrative management, and other cost is considered, at discretion of the management. And then you have the APR, and that basically you're reporting on your performance. This is how I spent my money. This is what I said I was going to do. This is how much I spent to do it. It's used by you as a recipient to give feedback to HUD. You also have to put it out for tribal member, or to the public, basically. So even non-natives have the right to read that. There's nothing in the law that says how long it has to go out for. They just want it out for public comment before you turn it into HUD. The sweet spot, when I called all the housing or, gurus at the different HUD offices, 2 weeks seems to be the sweet spot that they like to see it out for. So you have to back up your APR. You got to get your self-monitoring done. You have to put it out for comment. You have to have time for your governing body to approve it. And then you have to send it to HUD. So you really have to have your ducks in a row to make sure that this thing comes in a timely manner. Okay. It's a statutory requirement. It has to have public comment. It's a way to track your IHP progress. It's self-assessment through your self-monitoring. And you can see if you need technical assistance, which is free through HUD when you do your self-monitoring. Okay. And it's public information. It's supposed to be out, and the public is supposed to have access to see what you did with your money that year. Key sections, expanded formula area, if you've done your self-monitoring, if you've done all your inspections during the year, if you've had your audits, your public accountability, did you put that out for public comment? This is what I accomplished during the year. These are my actual outcomes and outputs. I said I was going to do 8. I did 7. and your budget. How much, did I leave left in these program areas? It's got a cover page, date of submission, who authorized it, who the name of the recipient, name and the title, authorized to submit it. It's got your reporting on all your different programs. What was your accomplishment? What was your reason for your delays? What was your outputs? And then you report on the actual sources and uses of funds for that prior 12-month period. That section, reporting on other submission items, where you described expenditure of funds in an expanded formula area. So if you went to HUD and you challenged your formula amount and said, I have people all the way to Detroit, they will sometimes give you more money if you can prove that you are servicing them. You now have to prove that you are servicing those families. You only have to do that if you have expanded your formula area. Okay. And then certifications, that you have all those compliance certifications that we talked about in the IHP. And you did your self-monitoring. Okay. Adequate insurance, policies in effect, same ones that we discussed during the IHP. So your APR is due to your EWONAP no longer than 90 calendar days after the end of your program year. Okay. You have to describe your activities, your expenses from your previous 12-month program year. It's designed to track all your IHP sections so you can report on the process of your eligible activities. Your timeline, 60 days. They have 60 days to review and make recommendations. They'll give you a report on your APR, that you carried out all your eligible activities in a timely manner in accordance with NAHASDA. You've complied with your IHP, and that they have deemed that actual report is accurate. If you look at your IHPs, if you're in a position where you're a reviewer of these things, and you're saying, I'm going to help 10 people with down payment assistance, and you don't help anybody, and you put it in there 2 or 3 years in a row, take it out. You can always put it back in, but your APR, you're being judged on what you did. If you're not going to do it, get it out. They don't tell you that you're really being judged at this point, okay? Because they look at that when they come in and they do their monitoring. They review your IHPs and your APRs, and did you do what you said you were going to do? Well, just because it was in there before, if you haven't done it, that's what you need to do, is review a couple of them. We haven't done this, or reduce the amount. We can always add more to it. You can amend it at any time. Is it on time within 90 days at the end of the program year? Is it complete? Do you have sufficient data for review? Can you prove what you're reporting? Is there progress on the IHP program and performance issues? And I am so sorry we are this late, guys. Please come back tomorrow. I'll try to be more timely. But there was a lot of information I didn't want you to miss either.
No worries at all, Cheryl. And that 5-minute late start was completely on me. I'm so sorry about that, y'all. I did put today's webinar feedback survey link in the chat for you. It is a different survey than yesterday. They are anonymous, so feel free to lay into the Native Learning Center facilitator who got us started 5 minutes late. I can take it, don't worry. But no, all jokes aside, it does help us know what's working well with the webinars, what we can improve upon. We do share the feedback with our instructors, so it helps them as well. And there's even a spot on there for you to recommend future topics. So helpful for everybody all around. We always want to keep improving. We hope you can join us for day 3 of the training series. That'll be tomorrow, same time, same place. You are on the learning platform now, so you don't really need to do anything else other than log in. You'll see that green banner at the top of the screen. It'll say Executive Director Training Day 3 live webinar. Click on that and you're good to go. It'll start hopefully at 2 p.m. sharp, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Alaska. And then feel free to check out this as well as our other recorded webinars. They are on our YouTube channel and our Kathita webinar archive. It goes back about 2 years, maybe a little more. And please check out our other upcoming training events. We post about them to our various social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. We have our in-house produced podcast, the Hope of Being a Native American podcast. you can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you prefer to watch the videos with our special guests, there is a playlist for that on our YouTube channel. It says Hope a Thing, a Native American podcast. But other than that, that is all we have for you today, folks. We hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. And we will see you tomorrow for day 3. I'm going to stop the recording, but I'm going to leave the room open so that you guys have access to those links